Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going through a series of video presentations for the textbook for the Rankin Technical College Application and Web Development, AWD1111.NET Framework with Web Databases course. Our textbook for the course is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS by Mr. Lee Naylor. And I've kind of jumped around. I've done lectures on the first 8 chapters, part of Chapter 9, and yesterday I did Chapters 14 and 15, which means I'm going to start right now with Chapter 16. And as it says, you can see it's entitled Styling Forms, Grid Layouts, and Tables. The chapter focuses on styling the other main pages of the site, starting with the category index page. It goes over things like how to style forms, how to make a simple grid layout, some of the pitfalls and features of CSS, including box sizing, inheritance, and styling tables. What I have done is I have got the finished product for Chapter 16, which is really the Chapter 17 code. So it says we're going to add some simple updates, and the current layout of the page should look like this. So you can see it needs some work. So the first thing to do is to change the space out, to space out the text on the page to add a new style. So our table data is going to have 5 pixels of padding, which means the stuff that's in the table that you see right here will have 5 pixels on the top, right, bottom, and left by putting this in. So you can see already, just with that one change, as the author says, the categories list is now spread out. So it's looking better. Still isn't great, the whole page, but it's starting to look better. We want the admin links to have a different font weight than the normal category links. To achieve this, we're going to use the existing large bold text class to style these links, but we're also going to make category links the same size but not bold. Add the following class to the store.css. Now I'm not going to be doing this. In fact, as mentioned, I've already got kind of the, let's see, this is the Chapter 17. So this should be, for lack of better words, kind of the after picture of everything that we are to do in Chapter 16. So you can see what we're moving toward. So again, you can see how nice this is starting to look in here. All right. And again, there's a lot of stuff we haven't talked about, we have not done yet. So again, this is the categories page. All right. Now, I've talked about this before, and I'd like to say it again. When you are working with things that are eventually that you're going to want to work with, and you're eventually going to want to change and make responsive, which is the last chapter in this book, Chapter 18, you should start with the end in mind. In other words, when possible, rather than using pixels and points for sizing, you should use M's and you should use percentages. Why? Because M's, and each M is basically the same as 16 pixels, but M's and percentages, basically what they try to do as much as possible is to take whatever it is that you're working on and kind of accommodate it, for lack of better words, for whatever medium you're using. All right. So it says to use this new style and style other links, modify the categories index as follows to apply the large text and the large text bold classes. So there's the large bold text and there's the large text. I think the difference between these is the large bold text looks like this, but it also has a font weight for it. Or else it just has the font weight. I don't remember. So you'll notice here we've got, for our paragraph here, our create new, etc., and our create, that'll be large and bold. This second one will be large, but it will not be bold. So you can see, again, the idea behind all of this, when possible, you always want to take and make the user experience be as nice as possible. In fact, there's been a whole new area that has been built up in IT that's called UX, that is on user experience. And not many, maybe, I don't know how many, but at least some of the people who are graduating from college and have degrees in subjects like psychology are getting into IT, and they're working as UX people, user experience people. So the idea is you've got so many different places that you can go to purchase things online, that what you want to do is you want to make the user's experience at your site as pleasing as possible. All right, so this is the modified categories page when you're logged in as an administrator. Here's a non-admin. What's the difference? Well, you've got the edit and delete, because as an admin you can add these things, but as a regular user you can just choose what's there. All right, so styling the category edit form, and we are up to page 505. As it says here, if you now click on one of the edit links to edit a category, the category edit page will appear in its current default format. Again, as you can see, not too professional looking. So the idea is to change it. So again, if I click on close, for example, and it's thinking about it, there we go. All right. You can see how much nicer it looks. I can come back down here, let's say, to feeding, and filter that, and boom, I go there. But look how much nicer, how much more professional something like this looks, as opposed to something like this. This page differs from the other pages we have seen so far because it contains an HTML form. Any changes we make to this page will be reflected in all other HTML forms throughout the site. Before we start to restyle the page, view the source by right-clicking and choosing View Page. That's the before picture, which I don't have here. Depending on which option you choose, you will see either the full source of the page or the developer tools. But again, we're talking about coming in and prettying this stuff up. The relevant HTML that makes up the forms is as follows. I've highlighted the relevant classes that need to be targeted by CSS. Well, basically the stuff that's in here: form group, control label column MD2 and column MD10, button default. These are all Bootstrap classes. So the first thing we do, as the author says there, is to add some spacing between the box and the save button. All right, some margin bottom. I have talked about this before. It is, in my humble opinion, of paramount importance that you have and understand the distinction between margin and padding. All right, there's Stack Overflow, when to use margin, when to use padding. And I've shown this before, maybe in this class, maybe it's been in other classes. I don't even remember anymore. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was in here. We've talked about CSS and the box model. So padding is what's directly around the content. Margin is what's directly around the border. We talked about this before. So the padding in here is right here. The margin is right here. And I think I even did this before where I changed the padding to, let's make it 225 pixels. And you can see how much bigger that got. On the other hand, when I knock it back again and I make the margin 225, now notice how big this area on the outside, so to speak, gets. So you know this already. You can change margin, you can change padding, you can change both. And of course we've got our border, which is in between these two things. So padding, border, margin. So the content is surrounded by the padding, which is surrounded by the border, which is surrounded by the margin. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. All right. So again, we add the spacing. Okay. We go to the footer, so we add a top margin or right there to the footer, and you can see it's starting to look a little better. There's the top margin right there. The effect of these changes is to add some vertical spacing to the form. Note that the changes have also affected the search box and the button on the navigation bar. We will override these later in the book when we style that part. All right. Adding a grid layout. In the previous chapter, we added a style for the column MD3, assigning its width property with a value of 25%. The form contains two other column classes, so it's now at a good point to add some styles for the other column classes. All right, so when you look at this, and you look, for example, here, what do we have? Some width styles for each available column. All right. It says each percentage is worked out by dividing the total number of columns 12 by the number included in the style. For instance, MD2 has a width of 2/12. In order to make the column styles appear as columns, they needed to be floated to the left. So for all of them, we do a float left. Next, as it says, remove the original style that was previously added. All right. This is now assigned a width to the columns and floated the category name to the left. So you see the effect here. Now, the funny thing about this is when you look at some of this stuff, you may very well look at it and go, wow, it looked better before I made that change. That's pretty natural. All right. Because two different designers / developers can look at the same code and have markedly different views as to what looks good and what does not look good. There is an issue in the form with the back to list link now out of position on a wide screen. All right, to fix this, we need to apply the same fix, basically the clearing both. That's what they're saying here. To move that over, I believe. Styling labels and text boxes. Make the label element bold in appearance. We make it inline block so that whatever follows it is on the same line. We make its weight bold and give it a top margin so we've got some spacing in between there. Next, we update the text box to appear with blue text and a blue border with rounded corners. The rounded corners is done with the border radius. All right, the blue border is right here. Typically, when you put in a border, even though they don't show it here, you give it a size. It may default to 1 pixel, but typically you really should give it a size anyway. We're also setting the text color here. The width settings for the form control class are different from those used before, and the width property is set to 100% to allow the element with this class applied. However, the max width property limits the element to a maximum of 250 pixels. So the idea is it says the page will now look like this. So notice that back to list, which had been over here, is now underneath the save button. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up in my book as well. And I lost my page. Okay, there it is. Previously, we added a basic column system. Now we're going to add some styles to address this. Currently, it says the Save button is located on the left of the page. We're going to show you how to relocate it so it's underneath the text box. Moving this over to here. All right. Now notice they're using an offset. Okay, so they're moving it over basically 2 columns, which results in pretty much what you think it would be. All right. If you wanted it maybe 4 columns, you could put it and center it here. All right. Again, all this stuff is open to interpretation as far as what looks good. So we set offset styles for each column. To complete the page, we're going to update the button, so that it behaves. Where are we? We're going to update the button so it behaves the same as the Shop Now button on the home page. So what are we doing? Well, that was what we had before, and now we're adding this. Okay, so we're saying either one of these should look like this, which makes it green, it's rounded, it's got white text. All right. Styling the cursor. The form looks pretty good now, but we want to make the cursor behave consistently when using actual buttons or links that appear as buttons. When the user hovers over the link, the cursor should change to a hand. All right, so we're also going to restyle the error messages to be bold red and appear beneath the text box rather than next to the text box. All right, the text danger is what makes it red. Notice here we're making it bold. And we're doing a display block. Okay. All right, and they give you an example right here. Right. There's a whole school and field of thought as far as this stuff goes. Should messages be over here? Should they be down here? Should you have a validation summary which shows all your errors either at the top or at the bottom? All right. Sometimes, it'll be predicated on what your end user wants to. All right. It says the form looks good, so let's check the effect of the other forms on the site. Let's check our time here. And we're at 18 minutes, so let's at least start to go through this. Figure 1613 on the next page shows the form for creating a product. It has been restyled by all the styles we added, but there's a couple of things. It says not apparent when editing a category. Some of the fonts don't look consistent, and the alignment when a form has more than one line does not look great. So you'll notice that's with more than one line. All right, and what was the other thing they mentioned here? Some of the fonts don't look consistent. Well, this, at least to me, looks smaller than this, for example. And this looks smaller. .515, we're talking here about inheritance. And the author mentions that here the text area element has a different font than the rest of the page does. It says it brings up an interesting feature of CSS in that the font used in all form elements, apart from labels, all differ from the body font. Each of the form elements actually uses Arial with a 13 1/3 pixel size set by the browser's default style sheet. Just so happens that the author chose a font and font size that made this look as though everything was being inherited correctly. So to see what they mean, change the font size from that 13 there to 20. You'll notice how all these fonts are now bigger than these fonts in here. To force all elements to be the same font size and weight, says use the inherit keyword down here, which means rather than setting your own, we're going to inherit from somewhere up above when it was set, and I believe that was in the body. Look at the difference now. As it says, now all the text box text, the text area text, the select list, and the create button all have the same size. All right. Now, if you didn't want that, of course, you could override it. Change the font size in the body back to 12 points. Okay, and there you go. There are a couple of alignment issues. The labels don't read well when left aligned, so they're going to right align them. And this line here on the labels, text align right, results in this. Now they may do this, or you may decide, yeah, that doesn't look bad, but maybe I want a little bit of margin or padding over here or whatever. That's what it says. Next page here on page 519. You can see that the text is right aligned as expected, but it's tight against each control. To add some spacing, we're going to add some padding to the right of the column styles because it's likely this may affect other things later. So you're putting that 5 pixels of padding in, and you'll notice that now, well, what did it do? It says this looks like it should work fine, but it should not. The reason is you only have a certain amount of room over here, so what it did was it made the labels appear block instead of inline. And the author mentions here on page 520 the author says here, this is caused by the way the browser calculates widths. I think I'm going to come back and finish this as a part 2 of this presentation in just a couple.